It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and with us to talk about Father Augustus Tolton is Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, the Dynamic Deacon. Thanks for being here, Deacon.
It's great to be with you, Kyle. Thanks for having me on today.
It's good to have you. Hey, when did you first find out about Father Tolton?
Well, when I was in 7th grade, growing up in New Jersey, that's the age that we had confirmation. So I was researching confirmation saints, that looked like me.
Uh-huh.
And, of course, back then, there's no internet. You couldn't do a Google search.
Uh-huh.
You had to go to the library. And I was looking through the card catalog and came across the original book about the life of Father Tolton by Sister Carolyn Hemisaf, From Slave to Priest.
Huh.
Now, of course, I couldn't use him as a saint's name because he wasn't a saint, but I've never heard of him before. And I remember looking through the book going, wow, never heard of this guy, and kind of filed it into the back of my mind. And fast forward to 2005, Ignatius Press buys the rights to that original book, republishes it, and asks me to write the foreword to the new edition of the book. So I'm like, oh, wow, that's great. So I really kind of delved into Father Tolton after that, and then had an opportunity to write my book, which is not about his life. There's already a book about his life, but lessons we can learn from his life that we can incorporate into our life, our faith life today.
Who did you end up picking for your confirmation saint?
God has a sense of humor. Philip, from Acts of the Apostles, Philip the Deacon. That was years before I even thought about anything about the diaconate, but sure, God has a sense of humor.
That's awesome. So for those not familiar with Father Tolton's story, can you give us a little background of him and his journey from slavery to discerning priesthood?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I do in the first chapter of the book, because I know that some people may not be familiar with him and with his story, so I just kind of summarize it in the first chapter. So he was born April 1st, 1854 in Brush Creek, Missouri, born a slave. Both his parents were slaves. In fact, his mother was a wedding gift to the slave owner where she met her husband, Father Augustus's father. And on his birth certificate, it says Augustus John Tolton, property of Stephen Elliott, who was a slave owner. And his father escaped through the Underground Railroad to try to fight the Civil War to free his family, and he died early in the war. His mother subsequently escaped through the Underground Railroad with Augustus and his brother and sister to crossing the Missouri River into Quincy, Illinois. And when they got there, they were Catholics, and they wanted to go to church, and the priests and the nuns welcomed them with open arms, but the parishioners rejected them. And they finally ended up in the Irish parish, and the priests thought that Augustus might have a vocation. When he got old enough, he was to apply for seminary. He was rejected from every seminary in the United States because he was black. So they went through a back door, got him into the Vatican. The Vatican took him and trained him to be a priest, sent him back to Quincy, Illinois after his training, and he met more racism, mostly this time from the clergy, from the other priests. And it got so bad he ended up going up to Chicago. Archbishop Fian in Chicago welcomed him with open arms. He served the communities well in Chicago, and then sadly died in 1897. So he's only 43 years old when he died of uremia, which is complication from heat stroke. But he is buried back in Quincy, Illinois.
So what did it mean for his parishioners for him to be the first African-American priest?
Well, it was obviously it was a great and tremendous blessing for the black community back then, because obviously they've never seen anyone like him before, and to have him in their community was a great boost. But it's also a tremendous challenge for Augustus as well, because they're obviously still dealing with the after effects and aftermath of slavery, the poverty, the substance abuse, the broken families. All those kinds of things the illiteracy, all that, he had to really try and minister to people in a way that the faith was meaningful to them in the midst of everything else that's going on in their lives. And he served, I think, as a powerful source of inspiration for people and kind of someone they can rally around. And he also had the Protestant churches trying to proselytize and take Black Catholics out of the church to go to the Protestant churches. He'd do a lot of different things, and he did so with grace, with courage, and with tremendous faith in God. That despite everything that's going on, in the Catholic faith remained the heart, the core, and the center of his life and ministry.
Whenever we hear these stories of people that seem to be able to break through some barriers and overcome racism, I'm always curious, what was it about them that made them kind of the leader in this movement of sorts? So what do you think it was about Father Augustus Tolton that he was able to break through some of this racism and be the first African-American priest to kind of break some new ground in this area?
Well, I think in this case, he has a very similar to St. Teresa of Calcutta, in the sense that they both saw Jesus in the person standing in front of them. It didn't matter what race or color or creed they were. When they saw someone, they saw Jesus. And they took the Genesis 1 seriously. This is, we're made in the image and likeness of God. And that's what they focused on when they looked at someone. I know in my own life, I try to do the same thing. You know, I keep trying to get the stereotypes out of my head and the stuff that we're being fed by the television and news media and social media, and just really try to see God in every single person I encounter. Yeah. And that was something that is a source of great inspiration and faith for me because of the life of Augustus Tolton. I mean, and back then, slavery was still very, very raw. I mean, he was still a slave. But he was born a slave, and obviously he was a priest just after, in that postbellum era, after the Civil War. And so it was still very raw racism. And to deal with it to the extent that he did, again, with such grace and such passion and such love, was just tremendously inspirational for me. And I think all of us can learn from lessons from his life today when it comes to overcoming racism.
Yeah. We're talking with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. The book is Father Augustus Tolton and reflects on the man who went from slavery to priesthood and lessons that we can learn from him. And besides that lesson of seeing the person in front of you as made in the image of God, what are some other takeaways that you hope readers get from reading the book?
Well, I also talk about building strong families. Despite the fact that Augustus' father died in the war, and then his younger brother also died of illness shortly after they arrived in Quincy. A single mom raising him. He had to work and go to school, work at a tobacco factory, plus go to school part-time. He still had this very deep and strong sense of the importance of family. And I look at the situation with all families, but particularly with African-American families, where 70% of children are born out of wedlock, and I talk about building strong nuclear families, again, where Jesus Christ is the heart and the center of that life as a family. I talk about the power of prayer. Augustus Tolton was a man of prayer, and to accomplish the things that he did in his short life could not be done without Jesus. In the Eucharist, especially, he spent a lot of time in adoration, a lot of time before the Lord in prayer, in silence, and being fed and nurtured by that silence to be able to do the work that God had him do. Talk about, building a culture of life and finding meaning in human suffering and freedom in God's mercy. Those are the themes I try to bring out, especially I look around in our world today, a world that's confused, a world that's broken, where so many people are self-centered, where they worship the Trinity of me, myself, and I. I think Father Tolton is a light in the darkness. He reminds us that life is not about me. It's when you give yourself away in love is when you truly find yourself in God. And so I try to bring out these things, hopefully to inspire people by the witness of his life to overcome challenges and obstacles that we have in our lives today.
And where is he in the canonization process?
So right now he's a servant of God. All the preliminary paperwork was submitted. That was all accepted. Then they dug up his body and took relics and had forensic anthropologists and people like that examine the body, make sure it was him, and make sure it hadn't been tampered with or anything like that. Uh-huh. And they actually put brand new vestments on him before they reinterred him. Everything was reviewed by the Committee of Cardinals at the Vatican for the cause of saints, and it was unanimously approved that he should move forward to the next phase. So Pope Francis, at some point, hopefully later this year, it'll be brought before Pope Francis, who will make the decision as to whether he can continue on the path to sainthood. And then, of course, then after that, they'll need a miracle, that he'll be blessed in a second miracle for him to be a saint. So we'll keep praying.
Yeah. One of the things that you talk about in the book is his prayer life. Can you share a little bit about that and what we can learn from that?
Yeah, see, Augustus was constantly praying. One of the things that St. Benedict says in his rule is to pray always, always. And that's something that I take. I find myself doing that now, like even when I get out of the shower or I'm getting on an airplane to go someplace, just thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. Just constantly just being mindful of the thankfulness in life. And that's something that Augustus did all the time. Obviously, besides praying the office and saying Mass and doing all the things that a priest would do, going out and visiting families that were broken, families that were hurting, praying with families, praying with the children. That he used to teach a catechesis class on Sundays in his parish, and he used to have the kids come and pray and teach them their prayers. Again, a lot of these children were illiterate. So he'd teach them by rote prayers. And it's just really to instill the love of God, understanding that prayer is the primary way in which we communicate with God. The word adoration, adoratio, literally means like mouth to mouth. So it's that beautiful divine intimacy with God in prayer. Again, who would have blamed Augustus for leaving the church? Right. I want to stop praying because God's obviously not here. Look at all this stuff going on with our community, with our families. He could have given up, but he didn't, because his tremendous love of God and focusing on the fact that it wasn't the people in the church. He focused on the teachings of the church were still true and good and beautiful, despite the people in the church who didn't live up to the teachings of the church that they were supposed to uphold. And it was his strong faith and prayer life that got him through.
Has the church ever apologized for the actions of some of its members towards Father Tolton and
it has.
other African-Americans?
Yes. The church has done so several times, actually. There's been several documents, and one just recently issued by the bishops about racism. So after slavery was over, there was a document. Actually, the popes have always taught that slavery was an intrinsic moral evil, and in fact, you incurred automatic excommunication if you owned slaves. Wow. But then the Bishop of the United States did come out with several documents. One, I think it was back in the 50s, and then there was one in the 80s written by the black bishops. And there was just a recent document that just came out about racism. Again, given the climate in our country and our world today. And so, it's still an issue after all these years. And I think that Augustus Tolton could really be another kind of voice in that dialogue to bring healing, reconciliation between the races.
Well, and such a great example to everybody of not giving up and to fight for what's right, and even persisting against trials, and such a great example for all of us. So thank you so much for sharing this with us, and encourage people to check out the book. Where should we send people to get a copy of it?
They can go to EWTN's website, EWTNRC.com, because the book is published by EWTN Publishing. That'd be the best place to go.
All right. Again, it's called Father Augustus Tolton. Thank you so much, Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, for sharing this with us and for the great work that you're doing. Appreciate it.
You're most welcome. It's a joy to be with you.